They told us the heavens would protect us. They lied. Oressa's lungs burned as she sprinted through the treacherous upper ridges, the betrayal tasting like ash in her mouth. High Priest Silas, the man who had sworn upon the sacred altars to protect her family's legacy, had been the one to issue the kill order. The Zenith Wardens weren't holy protectors. They were executioners wrapped in white wings and golden armor, and they wanted her blind brother's blood. "Give up the boy, Oressa," Silas's magically amplified voice boomed from the clouds above. "His sacrifice will purify the realm. It is the will of the light." "I'll carve out your heart first," she screamed back, her fingers brushing the hilt of her unignited sunlash. Behind her, the blaring horns of the sky cavalry shook the ancient pines. They had slaughtered her parents. They had burned her home to the ground. Now they were hunting the last two Sunweavers like animals. She had one choice left: the Forbidden Lands, the Obsidian Peak. It was a place where even the angels feared to tread. The domain of the primal beasts ruled by the Obsidian King, a monster forged of living magma, darkness, and nightmares. If we die, she thought, her jaw tightening as she neared the edge of the bottomless abyss, we die on my terms, not theirs. Chapter 1. The sky wasn't falling. It was hunting them. "Don't look back, Ryan. Just keep moving," Oressa screamed, her voice tearing through the thin air. She lunged forward, the weight of her younger brother on her back pulling at her shoulders like lead. Behind them, the rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the Zenith Warden's sky steeds vibrated in her very marrow. White wings tipped with lethal light sliced through the mist. "Oressa, they're too fast," Ryan cried, his blind eyes wide with terror, clutching her neck so hard she could barely swallow. "They won't get you," Oressa hissed through gritted teeth. "I'd burn the world before I let them touch you." A spear of pure, solidified light whistled past her ear, exploding against a tree trunk. The impact sent a shower of splinters into her cheek. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Then the ground vanished. They reached the edge of the Obsidian Peak. Below them lay a jagged abyss of black rock and swirling mist. "Stop!" a voice commanded from above. A warden captain hovered on his steed, his spear leveled at her heart. "Oressa Sunweaver, surrender. You have nowhere left to run." Oressa looked at the gold-clad monsters above, then at the dark, hungry void below. She tightened her grip on Ryan's legs. "I'd rather feed the beasts of the abyss than the vultures of the sky," she spat. She jumped. The scream died in her throat as gravity took hold. The wind roared, clawing at her clothes, threatening to rip Ryan from her arms. For a heartbeat, there was only the cold, certain approach of death. Then the world shattered. A massive dark shape erupted from the cliffside, moving faster than a landslide. A hand, huge, calloused, and radiating a heat that rivaled the sun, slammed into the rock face next to her, then swept inward. Oressa felt a sudden crushing force wrap around her waist. Her ribs groaned under the pressure as her downward momentum was wrenched into a violent halt. Thud. Her back hit a chest that felt like solid marble. She gasped, her lungs burning, and looked up. She wasn't staring at a man. She was staring at a god carved from volcanic glass. Lord Valthor, the Obsidian King. He stood on a narrow outcrop, his massive frame blocking out the sky. His skin was the color of midnight, etched with glowing, jagged fissures of orange light that pulsed like a heartbeat. His eyes were two burning embers of molten gold. He was holding her suspended over the drop, with one arm as if she weighed nothing. "You," Oressa whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Valthor's nostrils flared. He drew in a sharp breath, inhaling the scent of bitter orange and sun-drenched skin radiating from her. The glowing cracks on his arm immediately dimmed, the violent burning orange fading into a soft, soothing amber. He froze. For 3 agonizing seconds, the world stopped. His molten eyes locked onto hers, the feral madness in his gaze fracturing. He stared at her, a muscle ticking violently in his jaw, like a starving man who had just found water in hell. Recognition flared in his eyes, a terrifying primal possession. "Oressa, what caught us? It's burning," Ryan whimpered, his small fingers digging painfully into her collarbone, his fragile body shaking uncontrollably against her spine. Valthor didn't look at the boy. His grip on Oressa's waist tightened, pulling her flush against his towering, shirtless form. A low, guttural growl vibrated deep in his chest. "I've been waiting for you," Valthor rasped, his voice a dark rumble that shook the air around them. "Longer than you've been alive." "Let me go," Oressa choked out, struggling against his iron hold. "The boy is safe," Valthor interrupted, his gaze locking her in place. "But you are mine. There they are. Fire." The Zenith Wardens had reached the ledge. A dozen spears of light were pointed directly at them. Valthor didn't flinch. He used his massive scarred back as a shield, hiding Oressa and Ryan from the onslaught. The weapons of light struck his obsidian skin, shattering into harmless sparks. He slowly looked over his shoulder at the winged soldiers, his eyes igniting with murderous intent. "You brought war to my peak for a girl," Valthor hissed. "Then you shall have it. But this female is my exclusive prize, and anyone who looks at her will die." With a powerful kick, he leapt backward off the outcrop, carrying Oressa and the trembling boy still clinging to her back, down into the absolute darkness of the Obsidian Core. Chapter 2. The Obsidian Core was a cage of heat and shadow. "Get out!" Valthor roared, his voice shattering the stone pillars. "My king, you're burning alive," Bram shouted, wiping blood from his mouth as he picked himself up from the floor. Thane, massive and bruised, tried to step forward. "Restrain him. The curse is taking over." "Touch me and I kill you both," Valthor snarled. He was losing his mind. The magma fissures running up his right arm were blindingly bright, eating through his flesh, boiling his blood. Oressa backed into the obsidian wall, shoving Ryan firmly behind her. The heat radiating from Valthor was suffocating. He stumbled toward them, a feral beast blinded by absolute agony. His burning, cracked hand reached out, inches from Ryan's face. "Stay away from him!" Oressa screamed. She didn't think. She thrust her bare hands forward, grabbing his molten forearm to push him back. Hiss! Golden light flared instantly from her palms. The violent, destructive red magma beneath her touch instantly cooled to a quiet, soothing amber. The agonizing heat in the room vanished. Valthor froze. The feral madness in his eyes snapped clear. He let out a ragged, shuddering breath, his massive chest heaving. Oressa gasped. She realized she was holding the monster's cursed arm. Panic seized her. She tried to snatch her hands back. A low, vibrating growl erupted from his throat. Before she could pull away, Valthor's massive hand clamped around her wrists. He didn't let her go. Instead, he yanked her forward, slamming her palms flat against his bare, hard chest, right over his pounding heart. "Don't," he breathed, closing his eyes. His jaw tightened in absolute ecstasy. "Don't move." "Let me go," Oressa gritted out, her heart hammering against his chest. "You stopped the pain," Valthor whispered. He opened his eyes, the golden irises burning with a sickening, addictive hunger. He leaned in, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her bitter orange scent so deeply his chest expanded. "You are my cure." He turned his head slightly to glare at his stunned commanders. Take the boy to the east wing. Guard him with your lives." "No," Oressa thrashed against him. "Ryan stays with me." "Ryan is a guest," Valthor said, his voice cold and absolute. "You are my blood guard now. You stay in this tower, in my bed, skin to skin, until the curse is broken." Oressa glared up at him, her eyes flashing with pure hatred. "I am not your whore." Valthor's fingers traced her jaw, the touch terrifyingly possessive. "You are whatever I need you to be to survive. Refuse, and I let the curse take over. I will burn this mountain to ash, starting with the east wing. The choice is yours." She stopped struggling, her fists clenched. He had her trapped. Suddenly, the massive stained glass window exploded. 3 shadows lunged into the room, iron canopy assassins, their daggers dripping with green venom. They aimed for Valthor's blind spot, knowing he was completely distracted by the girl in his arms. "Look out!" Oressa shoved her weight against his chest, throwing him off balance. An assassin's blade missed Valthor's neck, catching the back of Oressa's collar instead. The fabric ripped violently, tearing the heavy cloak down to her shoulder blades. Valthor didn't even blink. He moved with a terrifying blur of speed. His hand shot out, grabbing the lead assassin by the throat. A sickening crack echoed through the chamber, and the lifeless body dropped to the floor. Bram and Thane instantly dispatched the other 2, but Valthor wasn't looking at the dead men. He was staring directly at Oressa's exposed back. Right at the base of her neck, glowing faintly in the dim light, was the intricate golden crest of the Sunweaver royalty. The air in the room instantly dropped by 20 degrees. Valthor's golden eyes turned pitch black. The magma on his skin flared, not with the curse, but with pure murderous rage. "Who else?" Valthor asked, his voice a deadly quiet whisper that made the floorboards tremble. "Knows you bear that mark, Apter 3. Get out." Valthor didn't yell. He didn't need to. The quiet, lethal drop in his voice was enough to make the stone floor tremble. Bram and Thane exchanged a single tense look. They didn't ask questions. They grabbed the lifeless bodies of the assassins and vanished behind the heavy iron doors, leaving Valthor and Oressa completely alone. The silence in the room was deafening. Oressa tried to cover her exposed back, her hands shaking. Valthor closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides. He didn't ask for permission. He stooped down, hooking one arm under her knees and the other around her waist, lifting her effortlessly against his bare, burning chest. "Put me down," Oressa demanded, striking his shoulder. "Stop fighting me," Valthor growled. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles twitched. "Before I forget, I am trying to keep you alive." He carried her deep into the royal quarters, kicking open a pair of heavy obsidian doors. The royal bath chamber was submerged in thick, suffocating heat. Hot spring water cascaded down black marble walls. Steam curled through the air, heavy with the scent of dark earth and crushed cedar. Valthor set her down roughly on the edge of the sunken pool. He stood over her, his massive chest heaving. The steam clung to his dark skin, highlighting every harsh cut of his muscles and the jagged glowing fissures of the magma curse that wrapped around his right arm. He knelt before her. The great Obsidian King, a monster feared across the realm, dropping to one knee. He reached out. Oressa flinched, but his massive hands were surprisingly gentle as he brushed her torn dress aside, his molten eyes fixed on the golden Sunweaver crest, glowing faintly at the base of her neck. "A fallen princess," Valthor murmured. His voice was a dark, velvet threat. "Hiding in the mud." "I am nothing," Oressa shot back, her chin raised in defiance. "Just a survivor." "You are a walking target." Valthor raised his cursed right hand. The magma lines flared. He pressed his glowing palm directly over the mark on her spine. Oressa gasped. It didn't burn. Instead, a wave of dark, freezing shadow seeped into her skin. When he pulled his hand away, the golden crest was gone, masked entirely by a faint, bruised shadow. Valthor leaned in close. His face was mere inches from hers, his golden eyes blazing with an obsession that made her breath hitch. "Listen to me very carefully, Wichul," he whispered, his deep voice vibrating against her lips. "You do not leave this tower. You do not leave my sight. If any other man looks at this mark, I will personally carve his eyes from his skull." Oressa didn't back down. "You don't own me." "I own your survival," Valthor countered, his fingers wrapping around her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Your enemies want your blood. My enemies want my throne. The only safe place for you in this world is in my bed, under my hands." Before Oressa could reply, the heavy chamber doors slammed open. Bram stood in the doorway, his usual mocking smile completely gone. He was out of breath. "My king, it's the boy." Oressa shoved Valthor away. "Ryan." She sprinted past the commander, Valthor's heavy footsteps echoing right behind her. They burst into the East Wing chambers. Ryan was thrashing violently on the bed. The healers were trying to hold him down, but the frail, blind boy possessed a sudden, unnatural strength. His unseeing eyes were wide open, glowing with a terrifying, piercing white light, the gift of clairvoyance, the true curse of the Sunweaver bloodline. "Rian, I'm here," Oressa cried, rushing to his side. She grabbed his flailing hands. "Wake up!" Ryan gasped, his spine arching off the mattress. The white light in his eyes flickered wildly. He stopped thrashing. His head snapped toward the doorway, toward Valthor. Ryan raised a trembling, pale finger. He pointed directly at the massive, shadowed figure of the Obsidian King, singling out the glowing, magma-cursed arm. "The black fire!" Ryan shrieked, his voice tearing at the seams. "The burning hand! I see it!" Oressa froze. The blood drained from her face. "Ryan, what are you saying?" "It's him!" the boy screamed, hyperventilating as tears streamed down his face. "He was there, Oressa, the monster in the dark. He's the one who slaughtered mother and father." The room fell into absolute dead silence. Oressa slowly let go of her brother's hand. She turned around. Valthor stood in the doorway. The glowing lines of his curse flared violently, casting a demonic red light across his face. He didn't deny it. He didn't say a word. He just stared at her, his golden eyes completely unreadable. Chapter 4. The freezing fog of the Mist River bit into Oressa's skin. She clutched Ryan's hand, her chest heaving as she stumbled toward the rushing water. Just a few more steps. A massive shadow slammed into the earth in front of them, shattering the frozen ground. Valthor rose from the crater. His breathing was heavy, his golden eyes burning through the dense fog. "You will not cross that river," Valthor commanded. Oressa shoved Ryan behind a boulder and drew her dagger. Her hand trembled, but her eyes were cold. "Get out of my way." "You are acting on the terrified ravings of a blind child," Valthor growled, taking a slow step forward. "Put the blade down, Oressa. You know you cannot beat me." "I know you lied to me," she screamed. "I kept you alive," Valthor snapped. "If you leave my territory, the wardens will tear you apart." "He is right about one thing, little bird." The fog above them parted. A blinding holy light illuminated the riverbank. High Priest Silas descended from a sky steed, his white robes pristine, flanked by a dozen heavily armed wardens. Valthor stepped in front of Oressa. his magma-cursed arm flaring violently. "Step onto my land, Silas, and I will rip your wings from your spine." Silas ignored the threat. He looked directly at Oressa with a sickening smile of pity. "Did the beast not tell you how he got his curse, Oressa?" Silas asked, his voice echoing over the roaring water. 10 years ago, the Sunweaver Palace fell, but it wasn't my wardens who breached the royal chambers." Valthor's jaw tightened. "Silence. Tell her, monster," Silas mocked. "Tell her who drove his hand through the chest of her father. Tell her who stole the sacred energy core, the very act that poisoned his blood with that hideous black fire." Oressa stopped breathing. The dagger in her hand suddenly felt 10 times heavier. She stared at Valthor's broad back. She stared at the glowing, jagged cracks on his right arm. The same arm that had held her gently in the bath. The same arm that had slaughtered her family. "Valthor," Oressa whispered. Her voice broke. He didn't turn around. "Look at me," she shrieked. Valthor slowly turned. The feral rage in his eyes was gone. Instead, there was a devastating, hollow emptiness. "Tell me he lies," Oressa pleaded, tears finally spilling hot down her frozen cheeks. "Tell me you didn't do it." Valthor looked at her crying face. He looked at the blade in her trembling hand. He didn't deny it. He didn't say a single word. He chose silence. The silence snapped the last remaining thread of Oressa's heart. The mate bond, the fragile trust, the terrifying attraction. It all turned to ash. With a guttural cry of pure agony, Oressa lunged forward. She drove the dagger straight into his chest, aiming directly for his heart. Valthor didn't dodge. He didn't block. Tsh! The blade sank deep into solid muscle. Oressa gasped at the impact. Her fist was pressed flat against his chest. Molten heat immediately spilled over her fingers, glowing a tragic, dying red. Valthor stood like a mountain. He didn't even flinch at the pain. He simply looked down at her, his golden eyes filled with an unspeakable, quiet suffering. He slowly raised his cursed, burning hand. He didn't strike her. Instead, his trembling fingers gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "If this brings you peace," Valthor whispered, his voice incredibly soft, "strike deeper." A sob tore from Oressa's throat. She violently twisted the hilt, yanked the dagger out and backed away. Valthor swayed, dropping heavily to one knee. The magma blood poured from the wound, sizzling against the frozen earth. Oressa didn't look back. She grabbed Ryan, turned to the cliff edge, and threw them both into the roaring, misty waters of the river below. On the bank, Valthor collapsed. His blood seeped into the river, dyeing the white mists a bleeding, broken crimson. Chapter 5. The Zenith will pay a fortune for the boy. The Iron Canopy warlord yanked Oressa by her wet hair, forcing her to her knees in the mud. Ryan sobbed, pinned to the ground by 2 rebel guards. The Mist River had washed them straight into an ambush. "Don't touch him," Oressa snarled, thrashing against her captors. The warlord laughed, drawing a rusted blade. "You have no power here, Sunweaver. You are just merchandise." The earth violently lurched. "What was that?" a guard shouted, dropping Ryan's arm. The tree line exploded. A monstrous silhouette obliterated the moonlight. It wasn't a man. It was a titan forged from living night and roaring fire, Valthor's colossal war form. His golden eyes were gone, replaced by a mindless, glowing red. The feral beast had taken absolute control. "Kill it!" the warlord screamed, shoving Oressa aside. It wasn't a battle. It was a natural disaster. Spears shattered against the monster's obsidian hide like glass. The beast swung a massive, shadowed arm. The impact echoed like a cannon blast, sending the warlord and his guards flying through the air into the dark woods. They did not get up. Tents were crushed underfoot. The remaining rebels fled in absolute terror. In seconds, the camp was silent. The beast turned. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Oressa. Oressa scrambled backward into the rocky gorge wall, pulling Ryan tightly behind her. Her breath hitched. There was no recognition in the monster's eyes, only raw, unhinged instinct. The titan stalked toward her. Every step shook the mud beneath her boots. It loomed over her, blocking out the sky. It raised a massive, burning claw. The magma was blazing out of control. The heat was blinding. "Valthor," Oressa whispered, terrified. The beast roared, but mid-roar the sound cracked. It turned into a guttural, agonizing choke. The monster froze. The human soul trapped inside the beast was fighting a devastating war against its own primal instinct. The burning claw hovered mere inches from Oressa's face, trembling violently. The beast slammed its own fiery hand down, burying its claws deep into the solid rock floor, physically trapping its own arm to stop the fire from touching her. "Mine," the beast rumbled, its voice distorted, demonic, and broken. "Get away from her." The colossal form began to violently warp and smoke. Flesh and shadow snapped together with sickening crunches. When the thick mist cleared, Valthor stood before her in his human form. He was completely battered. The dagger wound she had carved into his chest was still bleeding dark, ruined blood. He was swaying, barely able to stand. He didn't look at the crushed camp. He didn't check his perimeter. He stumbled directly toward Oressa. He slammed his uninjured hand against the rock face beside her head, trapping her. He was breathing heavily, his chest brushing against hers. His golden eyes were erratic, completely stripped of his royal pride. He looked at her with a terrifying, devastating desperation. "You are mine," Valthor choked out, coughing up black blood. "Hate me." He slowly slid down the rock face, dropping heavily to his knees in the mud. He rested his forehead against her stomach, his large hands weakly gripping the torn fabric of her dress. "Kill me," he whispered, his voice failing. "But you do not get to leave me." His golden eyes rolled back, and the Obsidian King collapsed, lifeless, at her feet. Chapter 6. He is dying. Bram didn't smile. The trickster of the Obsidian Peak looked utterly exhausted. He tossed a jagged, glowing memory stone onto the cold table in front of Oressa. "And you killed him," Bram stated. "He slaughtered my family," Oressa fired back. Though her voice shook, she refused to look at Valthor's blood still staining her hands. "Watch it," Bram commanded. The stone flared. A projection of pure memory flooded the dim room. Oressa stopped breathing. She saw her childhood home, 10 years ago. She saw High Priest Silas standing over her parents, but her parents weren't glowing with holy light. Their veins pulsed with a sickening black parasite. "The rot will consume the girl next," Silas laughed in the memory, watching them writhe. "The Sunweaver line ends today." Then the walls shattered. Valthor stepped through the rubble. Oressa watched her father drag himself to Valthor's boots. "Kill us," her father begged, coughing up black sludge. "Take the energy core. Absorb the rot. Save my daughter." Valthor didn't hesitate. He plunged his bare hand into the tainted core. Oressa watched the black fire surge up Valthor's arm, searing his flesh, binding him to a lifetime of absolute agony. He took their curse so she could live. He became a monster to keep her a saint. The memory faded. Oressa shattered. She ran. She pushed past the guards tearing down the stone corridors until she reached the containment depths. Valthor was chained to the obsidian floor, coughing up black blood. The magma curse was rapidly devouring his chest. "Get out," Valthor growled. He dragged his massive frame backward into the darkest corner of the cell, hiding from her light. "You lied to me," Oressa sobbed, falling to her knees on the scorched floor. "Don't touch me," Valthor roared. He pulled his cursed arm tightly against his chest, his golden eyes wide with devastating self-loathing. "My hands are covered in their blood. I am a monster, Oressa. I am not worthy to even look at you." Oressa didn't listen. She crawled forward. "You saved me," she whispered. She reached out, pressing her soft, trembling hands directly against his ruined, bleeding face. Valthor shuddered. An agonizing, desperate groan tore from his throat. The moment her skin met his, the feral beast inside him shattered his iron restraint. He lunged. He pulled her flush against his massive, burning chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled her scent deeply, his massive hands gripping her waist with terrifying, possessive strength. "Mine," Valthor breathed, his voice a raw, desperate rasp against her collarbone. "You are mine. Claim me," Oressa demanded, arching her neck, surrendering entirely to the king of beasts. Valthor's eyes flared with absolute primal obsession. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth and sank his fangs deep into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. The mating mark. Searing heat and blinding light exploded through Oressa's veins. Golden sunweaver magic and dark primal shadow twisted together in a chaotic, beautiful storm, permanently binding their souls together. Valthor's heartbeat synchronized completely with hers. Then the mountain violently shook. A blaring war horn ripped through the air. The sound was deafening, echoing from the heavens down to the core of the earth. Bram sprinted down the corridor, his face pale, his sword already drawn. "My king," Bram shouted over the deafening alarms. "The Zenith Wardens, tens of thousands of them. They've surrounded the peak." Bram swallowed hard. They brought the God-Killer cannons. Chapter 7. The sky rained holy fire. Solidified light artillery slammed into the Obsidian Peak, shattering stone and sending shock waves through the earth. The Zenith Wardens filled the heavens, a swarm of white wings and golden armor blotting out the sun. The heavy iron doors of the keep blew open. Valthor strode out into the inferno. He was no longer the broken beast in the dungeon. He was the primal king. And beside him, her hand securely laced with his, walked Oressa. The fresh mating mark on her neck pulsed with a brilliant, blinding mix of golden light and obsidian shadow. "They want a war," Valthor's voice boomed, resonating with dangerous power. "We will give them a graveyard." High in the sky, High Priest Silas sat atop a massive hovering war barge. He pointed his golden staff at the courtyard below. "Eradicate the beasts. Spare no one." Thousands of arrows rained down. "Not today," Bram shouted. The trickster commander didn't smile. He slammed his palms onto the cracked earth. Massive columns of absolute darkness erupted from the ground, weaving together to form a colossal dome of shadow over the entire lower city. The arrows of light slammed into the barrier and hissed into steam. Bram dropped to one knee. Black blood spilled from his lips. Maintaining the endless night against a holy siege was tearing his life force apart. "Hold the line, trickster!" Thane roared. The vanguard commander stepped forward. His bones cracked violently as he shifted into his colossal war form, a living siege engine of rock and muscle. Above them, the Zenith war barge aimed its primary cannon directly at the Shadow Dome. A blinding orb of concentrated energy charged up. It was a city-leveling strike. "For the king!" Thane bellowed. He lunged upward, throwing his massive body directly into the path of the cannon. The blast fired. The impact was a deafening, blinding explosion. Oressa screamed as the shock wave threw her back. When the light cleared, the giant beast still stood, shielding the city below. But a devastating beam of pure light had cleanly sheared off his right arm. Thane didn't fall. He didn't even take a step back. He let out a deafening roar and charged straight into the front line of the Warden infantry. "We end this," Valthor told Oressa, his golden eyes locking onto Silas's war barge. "Together," Oressa replied. She snapped her wrist. Her sunlash ignited, but it was no longer just golden light. Bound by their mating mark, Valthor's primal shadow coiled around the glowing whip, creating a devastating weapon of dark fire. They moved as one. Valthor crushed the heavily armored wardens with bare-handed, earth-shattering strikes, while Oressa's dark light whip cleaved through their ranks, instantly turning golden shields to dust. They were a devastating storm of absolute destruction. Panic rippled through the Zenith forces. The Holy Army was breaking under the combined might of a primal god and a Sunweaver queen. High above, Silas realized he was losing. His face twisted in ugly desperation. He reached behind his throne and pulled out a long, jagged spear, humming with a terrifying, sickly white energy. The God Killer, a weapon designed to permanently extinguish immortal souls. Down in the courtyard, Valthor had just ripped the wings off a warden captain. Oressa turned her back to the sky to cover his flank, her whip striking down 2 soldiers. Silas stood at the edge of his barge. He didn't aim at the towering king. He aimed at the one thing that could break the monster completely. He aimed at Oressa's unprotected back. "Die, heretic," Silas whispered. He hurled the God-killer's spear. It didn't whistle. It cut through the air in absolute deadly silence, rocketing straight toward Oressa's spine. Chapter 8. The God-killer spear did not scream. It whispered. Oressa didn't see it. She was turning, her whip catching the throat of another warden. But Valthor saw it. He didn't shout. There was no time. He moved with a terrifying, desperate speed, throwing his massive body between Oressa and the sky. Thud. It wasn't a loud explosion. It was a sickening, heavy impact. Oressa spun around. The world stopped. All sound vanished from the battlefield. The deafening roar of cannons, the clash of steel, the screams of the dying. It all faded into an absolute, suffocating, dead silence. Valthor stood frozen. The jagged, white-hot tip of the God-killer spear protruded from the center of his massive chest. Oressa stopped breathing. The sunlash in her hand flickered and died. "Valthor?" she whispered. The word barely made a sound. He looked down at her. The feral, unyielding primal king looked utterly fragile. The fierce molten gold in his eyes was rapidly dimming. He swayed. "No." Oressa caught him as his massive frame collapsed. The weight of him drove her to her knees on the cracked earth. She cradled his head in her lap, her hands instantly covered in his blood. But the blood wasn't burning anymore. It was cold. "Look at me," Oressa choked out, her vision blurring with hot tears. "Valthor, keep your eyes on me." The magma curse on his right arm, the violent orange fire that had burned for 10 long years, was dying. The light flickered, then went entirely dark. His obsidian skin was losing its shine, turning into dull, lifeless gray stone. The petrification was spreading from his wounded heart outward. He was turning into a statue. "Help him!" Oressa screamed at the silent sky. "Someone help him!" No one moved. High Priest Silas watched from his barge, a cruel, victorious smile spreading across his face. Valthor forced his heavy, petrifying hand up, his fingers turning to cold rock, gently brushed against her tear-soaked cheek. He didn't look at the spear. He didn't look at the army. He only looked at her. "Live," Valthor breathed, his voice a faint, crumbling echo. My son. His golden eyes closed. His hand fell from her cheek, hitting the ground with a heavy clack of solid stone. He was gone. Oressa stared at the stone face of her mate. The silence stretched, tight and unbearable. The bond in her chest, the tether of fire and shadow that tied her soul to his, snapped. She didn't cry. The pain was too massive, too absolute for tears. It hollowed her out, leaving nothing but a devastating, bottomless void. She threw her head back and screamed. The sound tore her throat, a raw, inhuman wail of pure agony that shattered the dead silence of the battlefield. It was a sound that made the iron canopy rebels drop their weapons and the Zenith wardens cover their ears in sheer terror, and then the void inside her ignited. The mating mark on her neck didn't just glow, it exploded. A pillar of blinding, scorching gold erupted from her body, piercing the clouds and shaking the very foundation of the Obsidian Peak. Oressa rose to her feet. She was no longer a hidden princess or a terrified survivor. She was a divine force of nature. The golden light rapidly solidified in her hands, taking the shape of the ancient, legendary sun scepter. Her eyes, usually a soft brown, were now glowing entirely white with pure, unadulterated divine wrath. High Priest Silas's smile vanished. He gripped the edge of his barge, his face completely drained of color. Kill her. Fire everything. Thousands of wardens aimed their weapons. Oressa didn't even look at them. She looked at the stone body of the man who had burned for her. You took him from me, Oressa's voice echoed, completely devoid of mercy. It was the voice of a god passing judgment. She raised the sun scepter high above her head. Burn! She slammed the scepter into the earth. A tsunami of pure, devastating solar fire exploded outward. It didn't burn trees or stone. It targeted the Zenith wardens. The golden fire swept across the sky, instantly vaporizing the sky steeds, melting golden armor and turning thousands of winged soldiers into falling ash. The war barge caught fire. Silas screamed as the holy light he worshipped consumed him utterly, erasing him from existence in a single heartbeat. In less than 10 seconds, the entire Zenith army was gone. The sky cleared. The war was over. Chapter 9. Ash fell like gray snow over the ruined courtyard. The Zenith army was gone. Only silence remained. Oressa let the sun scepter fade from her grasp. She didn't look at the sky or the cleared battlefield. She dropped to her knees beside the solid stone statue of the Obsidian King. The god-killer spear was gone, reduced to dust by her light, but the hole in his petrified chest remained. Valthor, Oressa whispered, her voice cracking. She placed her hands flat against his cold stone chest. Nothing. No heartbeat. No agonizing heat. Just the freezing chill of death. You told me I wasn't allowed to leave you, she sobbed, pressing her forehead against his rigid collarbone. You don't get to leave me either. Wake up. Behind her, Bram limped into the courtyard, clutching his bleeding side. Thane, missing an arm and covered in ash, dragged himself forward. Ryan stumbled blindly through the rubble, calling out her name. They all stopped. They watched their queen weep over a fallen god. Wake up! Oressa screamed. She slammed her hands against his chest again. She closed her eyes and reached deep into her soul, finding the absolute core of her Sunweaver magic. She didn't just summon light. She summoned her life force. The mating mark on her neck ignited with a blinding, desperate gold. She pushed everything she had into the stone. Take it. Take my light. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The ash continued to fall. Oressa's light began to dim, her strength failing. Then, A microscopic sound broke the silence. Crack. Bram stopped breathing. Thane's jaw dropped. A tiny fissure appeared on Valthor's stone chest. Golden light spilled from the crack, intensely bright. The light surged into the hole left by the spear, knitting the stone back together. Thump. A heavy, echoing heartbeat shook the ground beneath them. Crack. Shatter. The petrified stone exploded outward in a shockwave of dust. Oressa was thrown backward, but a massive, warm hand caught her waist midair, pulling her flush against a solid, heaving chest. She gasped, opening her eyes. Valthor was breathing. His skin was no longer dark obsidian stone, but warm, flawless flesh. The jagged, glowing cracks of the magma curse that had tormented him for 10 years were completely gone. The corrupted black blood had been entirely purged by her divine light. He opened his eyes. They weren't the pained, feral embers of a cursed beast. They were a deep, clear, radiant gold. Valthor, Oressa choked out, her hands immediately flying to his face. You're alive. The curse, it's gone. He stared down at her, his chest rising and falling heavily. He didn't say a word. He just buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent like a drowning man taking his first breath of air. His massive arms crushed her to him, desperate and possessive. When he finally pulled back, he didn't look at his healed arm. He didn't look at his victorious commanders. Valthor, the terrifying primal god, stepped back and dropped to one knee in the ash. He took Oressa's trembling hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. I am no longer the Obsidian King, Valthor declared, his deep voice carrying across the silent, ruined courtyard for everyone to hear. I am just a man, and my life, my soul, and my blood belong to the Supreme Queen. Bram smiled, a real, genuine smile, and dropped to his knees. Thane bowed his massive head. The remaining soldiers of the peak fell to their knees in absolute reverence. They weren't bowing to the beast. They were bowing to the light that saved him. 1 month later, the Obsidian Peak had been rebuilt, but the old iron throne was gone. In its place stood a massive throne carved from pure, uncursed obsidian, laced with veins of sun gold. Oressa sat on the throne, the crown of the unified realms resting on her head. The council had just been dismissed. The grand hall was empty. A massive shadow stepped up behind the throne. Valthor leaned down. His large, warm hands slid over her shoulders, his thumbs gently tracing her collarbones. He pressed his broad chest against her back, his dominant alpha presence instantly swallowing the space around her. Oressa leaned her head back against his shoulder, closing her eyes with a soft sigh. The emissaries are demanding a treaty by tomorrow. Let them wait, Valthor growled softly. He brushed her hair aside, his lips grazing the permanent, deeply scarred mating mark on her neck. The touch sent a jolt of raw electricity straight down her spine. You are too possessive, my king, Oressa whispered, a smirk playing on her lips. I died for you, Valthor replied, his voice dropping an octave, dark and vibrating with absolute ownership. He turned her chin, forcing her to meet his burning golden eyes. I will be as possessive as I please. He looked out over the vast recovering kingdom, visible through the grand arches. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over their empire. Valthor leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. His grip on her waist tightened, an unbreakable anchor. This world burned once to take you from me, he whispered, the promise ringing with primal finality. I won't let it burn again.